This is Chapter 5, Screencast number 2, and in this screencast we're going to look at fertility rates and life expectancy and how these affect the size of a population and the rate at which the population grows. So first, some vocabulary terms. TFR, total fertility rate. That's the average number of children that each woman in a population will bear. And replacement level fertility means the total fertility rate needed to offset the average number of deaths in a population so that the current population size remains stable. So the human population size in billions just since the 1900s has been growing exponentially and continues to grow. Some of the countries have managed to get population growth under control, others have not. So in the future, there will be estimates that population growth might continue to go above 10 billion or even fall down here, back down to maybe 6 billion. So time will tell. So fertility rates vary by country, but in generalization here, a developed country, an economically developed country, tends to have high levels of industrialization and income, and the total fertility rate is typically low, such as 2.1 here. Developing countries are countries, economically developing countries, are countries with relatively low levels of industrialization. Excuse the interruption. Okay, so developing countries, economically developing countries, have relatively low levels of industrialization and typically have lower incomes, even as low as $3 per person per day. And the total fertility rate is usually much greater than 2.1, so that they can have replacement level fertility, because healthcare and other things that are not available to many folks in developing countries results in lower life expectancy and therefore more deaths, and therefore they need more offspring in order to maintain replacement levels of fertility. All right, so on the next slide, I'm going to go through some of the factors that affect birth rates in both developed and developing countries, but I suggest that you first pause and see if you can think of on your own some of the factors that affect birth rates. What drives people to have more children or less children? And what factors allow them to have more children or less children? Okay, let's take a look at that. So one of the key reasons why birth rates are higher, why people have more children in developing countries, is because the children are often part of the labor force, particularly in farming communities. A second factor is the cost of raising and educating children. So in a developed country such as the United States, the realization that to raise and educate children is an expensive undertaking, people may choose to have fewer children. The availability of retirement systems is important. So if you have, in a developed country such as the United States, when there are retirement systems such as Social Security available, then people are not relying on their children to support them during their older age. However, in most developing countries, there is not a retirement system available. And in fact, that was one of the factors that occurred in China when their cultural system was set up so that if you had a son and he married, then the wife would come to live with his family. So if your child was a girl, then when they got married, they would go and live with the husband's family. And that meant then the husband's family would have someone to help take care of them during their older age, but the one that had a girl as offspring would lose that assistance. And so again, that was one of the factors that led to people wanting to have larger families, and in particular to favor the boys over the girls. Urbanization actually has an opposite effect than you might think on birth rates. Urbanization meaning when people live in cities more closely together. And actually the birth rates are lower in that case, most likely because of some of these other reasons, such as they have higher income, more availability for other things, and aren't relying on children as part of their labor force. Another important factor is educational and employment opportunities for women. So in some countries, one of the most effective methods that's been implemented to reduce the number of births is to provide educational opportunities and employment opportunities for women. Average marriage age is another factor affecting birth rates. In a society, if it was typical for people to marry at, say, age 18, they'll have more children than another population that might have an average marriage age of, say, 25, which would certainly have more children than a population where people would marry at, say, age 35. So the younger, the more children. The availability of reliable birth control methods is also very critical to the number of births. And last but certainly not least, religious beliefs, traditions, and cultural norms all can either raise or lower, more typically raise birth rates. And many of these overlap, of course. Okay, so now I think we're going to look at life expectancy and its effect. Oh, no, in just a minute. First, we're going to look at family planning. That is being able to plan the number and the spacing of offspring through the use of reliable birth control. And as more women become better educated, the total fertility rate does tend to drop. And they've given a few examples here. The purple represents women with no education, and the orange is women with secondary or even higher education. And you can see there's a significant difference in most of these examples in the total fertility rate. Okay, next we're going to look at a specific population of the United States during a period of time from about 1915 through 2010. So remember that this is not your global population, which is increasing exponentially. This is a specific snapshot of the U.S. population to look at some of the factors that have raised and lowered our fertility rates. So back around 1920, the average number of births per woman was about 3.25, say. And then you can see that over a period of time, basically by 1935, it had gone down to 2 births per woman. And then during the period from 1946 to 64, which is known as the baby boom, the total births per woman again increased. And then about 1970, there was a decline and then a leveling off of fertility rates. So many historical factors occurred during this time period. The 1920s was known as the Roaring Twenties. People were very optimistic about the economy and life and so forth, and were having more children. Then when the Great Depression hit, the number of births per woman dropped off due to a number of factors, everything from men leaving home to go find jobs elsewhere, just the circumstances and knowing what they were going through and what they couldn't afford, many other factors, but it did result in quite a big decrease in the number of births. And then after 1945, after World War II ended and the soldiers came home, there was again enthusiasm and optimism about the economy, about the nature of the United States, etc. and it led to a baby boom. And the government supported this idea of having a baby boom and provided low-cost mortgages and things like that for families, and that's also led to the suburban areas growing, etc. Then in the 1960s, the birth rate dropped. One of the contributing factors here was the reliability of birth control, and in particular, the birth control pill that was developed. And then after that, the fertility went up and down slightly in different years, but it remained essentially the same. Okay, so one more time, this is a snapshot of the United States, but do remember that globally, the population size is increasing exponentially. All right, now we're going to take a few minutes to look at life expectancy. So just like the birth rate, life expectancy also is a factor in determining how large a population is and how quickly it's growing. So first, the definition. It's the average number of years that an infant born in a particular year in a particular country can be expected to live, given the current average lifespan and death rate of that country. So take a moment for yourselves again, put this on pause, and think about what factors affect life expectancy, and then we'll take a look at it. Okay, so there are many factors that affect life expectancy. The big ones since the 1600s are an increase in understanding sanitation, a control of infectious disease, and a decrease in infant mortality. So all of these factors have come into play in the last 400, 500 years. Sanitation, big thing today even, right? Washing your hands. Control of infectious disease. Many diseases that are still exist globally, but many of them have vaccines developed against them, like measles, mumps, rubella. And so those infectious diseases have come under control, though there are constantly emergent or new infectious diseases emerging. And infant mortality decreased when there was the onset of midwives and later hospitals for births, and a better understanding about maternal care and infant care. Okay, so in the United States, the average life expectancy is 78 years. And you can see that, and that's true of many developed nations. But as nations are less developed, the life expectancy is lower. So one of the key points I want to point out here is that these are averages. So it doesn't mean that most people in the United States live till they're 78 and then boom, they're gone, right? There's a huge wide range. If you look through some of the gravestones here on Cape Cod, you'll see many of these gentlemen farmers who lived to a very ripe old age. So it's looking just at the average number and using that as an indicator of what's happening. Life expectancy actually decreased a couple of years ago in the United States. After continuing to inch up, it took a hit due to opioid overdoses. And I expect that once we complete this cycle with COVID-19, we'll also have an effect on our life expectancy. And when you combine that with infant mortality rates, you find, of course, the same type of thing. Infant mortality rate is when a child under the age of 12 months dies per 1,000 live births. And here, of course, you'd want the number to be low, or the lighter blue, and things are more severe as infant mortality rates go up in less developed countries. All right, I think we'll need to pause that here. Yes.